A scream sliced through the Saturday market air. Not of fear, but defiance. When they tore her dress, they didn't see a victim. They saw a target. They had no idea she was the hunter. The Oak Creek Artisan Fair was a symphony of small-town perfection. Sunlight filtered through the broad leaves of ancient oak trees, dappling the cheerful chaos below. The air smelled of cinnamon-dusted almonds and fresh-cut flowers. A lone guitarist picked out a gentle melody near the fountain, his open case sparsely populated with dollar bills. Here, life felt safe, predictable. Dr. Aris Thorne, 40 years old and radiating a quiet, academic confidence, was tracing the delicate lines of a hand-carved wooden songbird. The stall owner, a man with flour on his apron, explained how he'd carved it from a fallen branch in his own backyard. Aris smiled, a genuine expression that warmed her features. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice a low, pleasant alto. "I'll take it." As she slipped the wrapped bird into her tote bag, a shadow fell over the stall. "Ma'am, I need to see what's in your bag." The voice was a gravelly bark. Aris turned to face Sergeant Maddox, a man whose stocky frame seemed poured into his uniform, his face ruddy with impatience. Beside him, younger, leaner, stood Officer Cale, his eyes darting nervously from Aris to the growing crowd. Aris's smile didn't vanish, but it tightened. "Excuse me, officer. Is there a problem?" The vendor from the jewelry stand reported a theft, Maddox grunted, gesturing vaguely with his thumb. "Said a woman matching your description took a silver necklace." A ripple of disbelief went through the nearby shoppers. The baker stepped forward. "Officer, she just bought this bird from me. I have her receipt right." "Stay out of this," Maddox snapped, his focus locked on Aris. "The bag. Now." Aris held her ground, her posture unwavering. "I have a receipt for everything in my tote, officer." "That accusation is baseless. You are making a mistake." Her calmness seemed to infuriate him. It was a rejection of his authority. "I'm not asking again." He reached for her tote. Instinctively, Aris pulled it back. And in that instant, the world fractured. Maddox lunged, grabbing not just the bag but her arm. Cale, hesitant but following orders, moved to her other side. Aris was thrown off balance, her body twisting as they wrestled the tote from her grip. The contents spilled onto the asphalt, a wallet, a paperback novel, and a cascade of wild strawberries, their bright red color like drops of blood against the gray pavement. But it was the sound that made everyone freeze. A harsh, tearing rip. In the struggle, Maddox's hand had caught the fabric of her emerald green linen dress. A jagged tear now ran from her hip to her mid-thigh, exposing her skin and underwear in a brutal, public violation. A collective gasp went through the crowd. A child began to cry. Maddox shoved her forward, her bare knee hitting the hard ground. Cale quickly snapped cuffs around her wrists, his movements jerky, his face pale. Forced to her feet, exposed and degraded, Aris Thorne looked not at the officers, but at the crowd. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the stunned faces until they locked onto a teenage girl holding up her phone, its red recording light a tiny, defiant beacon. Aris gave a nearly imperceptible nod. As they forced her into the back of the hot police cruiser, Maddox sneered, "Think you're so smart, huh?" Aris said nothing. She leaned her head back against the seat, her breathing even. Her eyes held a cold, calculating focus. They hadn't just arrested a citizen. They had triggered an avalanche. The Oak Creek police station smelled of stale coffee and industrial bleach, a sterile counterpoint to the vibrant life of the market. Aris was processed with a detached, humiliating efficiency. Her pleas to see the jewelry vendor or to review security footage were met with derisive smirks. "You'll get your phone call," Chief Grant said, emerging from his office. He was a man in his late 50s, his uniform crisp, his demeanor one of profound annoyance. This was a messy inconvenience, not an injustice. He looked at Aris, the torn dress, and his expression hardened. This was a PR problem. One call. Make it count. Led to a metal desk. Aris picked up the receiver. Her fingers, steady and deliberate, punched in the 11 digits from memory. Maddox stood nearby, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. He expected a tearful call to a husband or a frantic plea to a family member. The line clicked. A crisp, professional voice answered, devoid of emotion. Aegis. Go secure. Aris's voice was low and clear, a stark contrast to the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. This is Spectre, 7. Activating red protocol. Coordinates Oak Creek. Incident code 4 Delta. A beat of silence on the other end. Maddox shifted, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What kind of language was that? The voice returned, just as calm. Understood, Spectre, 7. Multiple video feeds are active. We've seen it. You're live. Hold your ground. Extraction protocol is in motion. Confirmed, Aris said, and hung up. She turned to face a frozen Sergeant Maddox. His smugness had evaporated, replaced by a dawning, uncertain dread. What the hell was that? He demanded, his voice a half-whisper. Aris met his gaze, her eyes like chips of ice. That, she said softly, was you losing your job. Before Maddox could respond, a frantic-looking officer Cale rushed in from the main lobby. Chief. You need to see this. He held up his phone. On the screen, a video played, a high-angle shot from a stall rooftop, clearly showing Aris's peaceful purchase, Maddox's aggression, and the deliberate tearing of her dress. It's everywhere, Cale stammered. Twitter, Facebook, hashtag Oak Creek Assault is trending nationally. There are 3 different angles. Chief Grant stormed out of his office, his face a mask of fury. He grabbed the phone and watched, his knuckles turning white. The footage was damning, unambiguous. He looked from the phone to Aris, who sat calmly on the bench, a silent, powerful indictment. Panic, sharp and acrid, began to seep into the air of the precinct. Phones started ringing off the hook, local news outlets, the mayor's office. The carefully controlled world of the Oak Creek Police Department was cracking, and at the center of the earthquake sat a 40-year-old woman in a torn green dress, waiting. The Aegis Initiative was a ghost organization to the public, but to those in power, it was a name whispered with fear. It meant former federal prosecutors, digital forensic wizards, and legal strategists who dismantled corrupt systems from the inside out. And Spectre, 7 was their most effective agent. 2 hours later, Aris walked out of the station with no charges and no apology. A dark sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. The door opened and she slid inside. At the wheel was Marcus, a man in his late 40s with the weary eyes of a former federal agent and a mind like a steel trap. He didn't say a word, just handed her a bottle of water and a fresh burner phone before pulling smoothly into traffic. Their destination was a nondescript motel on the edge of town, room 212. Inside, a laptop was already open on the cheap desk, displaying a dozen video feeds from the market. Team pulled backups from every vendor with a cloud-based system the second you gave the code, Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. They wiped the precinct's local server access 30 minutes ago. For the next hour, they worked in silence, a well-oiled machine. Aris, now in a simple t-shirt and jeans, analyzed the footage frame by frame, her legal mind deconstructing the incident into a prosecutable case of assault, battery, and civil rights violations. She identified witnesses, cross-referenced timelines, and built a digital fortress of evidence. The aggression was premeditated, Aris murmured, pausing a clip that showed Maddox speaking into his shoulder mic moments before approaching her. He was given a directive. This wasn't a mistake, it was a mission. Marcus nodded grimly. A mission to do what? Make an example of someone? Or to provoke a reaction they could use, Aris countered. They wanted a fight. I didn't give them one. It was then that her instincts, honed by years of undercover work, screamed at her. The room felt wrong. It wasn't the stale air or the faint smell of disinfectant. It was a feeling. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the generic, plastic smoke detector screwed into the ceiling above the bed. It was standard issue, but a tiny, almost invisible seam near its edge was misaligned. Without a word, she stood on the bed, wrenched the plastic casing from its mount, and tore it open. Tucked inside, nestled against the wiring, was a tiny listening device. A single pinprick of red light blinked slowly, methodically. It was active. Marcus let out a low curse. He immediately began sweeping the rest of the room, his movements swift and professional. Aris stared at the bug in her hand, a cold dread coiling in her stomach. This changed everything. This wasn't just a case of two rogue cops. This was a sophisticated surveillance operation. They knew she was coming. Sentinel Dynamics, Marcus said, pulling a second, identical bug from behind the television. It's their signature hardware. Private security firm with deep city contracts. Aris's mind raced, connecting the dots. The tip-off to Maddox. The targeted nature of the confrontation. The surveillance waiting for her in a random motel room. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the full weight of the situation crashing down on her. She looked at Marcus, her eyes wide with a terrifying new understanding. They weren't reacting to me being here, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They were waiting for me. The trap hadn't been the arrest. The arrest was just the bait. The real trap was all around them. The discovery of the bugs transformed the mission. This was no longer about exposing two violent cops, it was about dismantling a conspiracy that had its tentacles wrapped around the entire town. Aris knew she couldn't fight a shadow network alone. She needed to weaponize the one thing they couldn't control, the truth. As if on cue, the evidence began to pour in. The Aegis Initiative's encrypted Dropbox, shared via back channels by digital activists, became a beacon for the silenced. The first was an email from the baker who had witnessed the arrest. Attached was a crystal-clear video from his stall's security camera, the one he'd told the cops was broken. It captured an undeniable truth. Maddox hadn't accidentally torn Aris's dress, he had yanked the fabric downward with deliberate, malicious force. Then came a direct message on a secure app from the teenage girl who had locked eyes with Aris. Her name was Tasha. Her shaky phone footage was filmed from a low angle, and it captured something the other cameras missed, Officer Cale's face at the exact moment the dress ripped. It wasn't the face of an accomplice, it was a mask of horror and regret. His jaw tightened, his eyes darted away, a man at war with his own conscience. By midday, they had statements from a dozen more witnesses. A retired black police officer, forced out of the department years earlier, sent over redacted internal affairs files he'd secretly copied, showing a pattern of complaints against Maddox that had all been quietly buried by Chief Grant. Aris realized the power was shifting. The narrative was no longer just hers. It belonged to the baker, to Tasha, to the retired officer. It belonged to Oak Creek. It's time, she said to Marcus. They think I'm hiding. Let's show them who I am. She logged into a personal social media account that had been dormant for 3 years. Her profile picture was professional, her bio simple, attorney. Advocate. Believer in visible justice. She typed a short, powerful statement. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. Today, in the Oak Creek Artisan Fair, my dignity was publicly assaulted by officers of the law. They tore my dress, but they will not tear my resolve. This was not about a stolen necklace. This was about power, intimidation, and the assumption that some of us can be silenced. To the people of Oak Creek who stood by and bore witness, thank you. This is not just my story anymore. It is ours. She hit post. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. The post was shared thousands of times within the hour. National journalists, civil rights organizations, and celebrities amplified her message. They now had a name and a face for their outrage, not just a victim, but a leader. Dr. Aris Thorne, a calm, articulate, 40-year-old black woman with a PhD and the composure of a seasoned warrior, was a symbol they could rally behind. She wasn't the torn dress woman anymore. She was the woman who was fighting back. And thousands of people were lining up to fight with her. The established powers of Oak Creek did not crumble, they punched back. Hard. Seeing the narrative slip from their grasp, Chief Grant and the mayor's office launched a coordinated smear campaign. In a hastily called press conference, the mayor, a polished woman with a forced smile, spoke of outside agitators and questioned Dr. Thorne's motives for being in their peaceful town. News reports, fed by anonymous police sources, painted Aris as a professional provocateur with a history of filing lawsuits against police departments. They were trying to poison the well. "They're scared," Aris said, watching the press conference on mute in the motel room. This is the desperate flailing of a collapsing system. The true countermove, however, came from a source deep within the system itself. At 9:17 p.m., an anonymous email arrived at the Aegis server. The attachment was a 15-second audio file, a bodycam recording that had somehow escaped the digital purge. The quality was poor, but the voices were clear. It was Chief Grant, speaking to Maddox in the station parking lot hours after the arrest. "Listen to me," Grant's voice snarled. "This thing is going federal. Before it does, you rip her credibility to shreds. You hear me? Paint her as unstable, aggressive, a liar. That's the only play we have left." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That's not a smoking gun. That's a nuclear warhead." It was the final piece Aris needed to detonate the conspiracy from within. But before she could deploy it, another player made his move. Officer Cale, haunted by Tasha's video of his face and crushed by the weight of his complicity, reached out through a lawyer. He wanted to talk. They met in a sterile conference room in a neighboring town. Cale was a ghost, his skin sallow, his hands trembling as he clutched a cup of coffee. He didn't make eye contact. "It was a setup," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Sentinel Dynamics flagged you the moment you entered city limits. They have a predictive policing algorithm. Your work with civil rights groups put you on a persons of interest list." Aris's blood ran cold. "So they sent Maddox." "They sent Maddox to provoke you," Cale confirmed, finally looking up, his eyes filled with a miserable mix of fear and shame. Chief Grant approved it. "The goal was to get you on camera losing your temper, resisting arrest, anything they could use to discredit you before you could start an investigation here. But you stayed calm. It made Maddox furious. Ripping your dress, that was him losing control. That wasn't part of the plan." He slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything," he said. "Internal emails between Grant and Sentinel. Deleted complaint files against Maddox. The budget allocation that paid for the illegal surveillance tech. It's all there." Aris took the drive. This was it. The key that unlocked the entire rotten structure. Cale hadn't just confessed, he had handed her the blueprints to the entire conspiracy. The system, in its desperation to protect itself, had just produced the witness who would burn it to the ground. The federal courthouse was a pressure cooker. With Cale's testimony and the evidence on the flash drive, the Department of Justice had moved with stunning speed, securing an injunction against the Oak Creek PD, federal agents descended on the precinct, seizing servers and files. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, but the moment still held a breathtaking power. The judge, a stern woman who had listened to the evidence with mounting fury, delivered her ruling in a packed courtroom. Chief Grant and Sergeant Maddox were immediately suspended and referred for criminal prosecution on charges of conspiracy, assault, and civil rights violations. All city contracts with Sentinel Dynamics were declared void pending a federal investigation into corporate espionage and illegal surveillance. A wave of relief and applause swept through the gallery. Aris didn't smile. She closed her eyes and took a single, deep breath. It was the first breath she'd taken without the weight of the fight on her chest in what felt like a lifetime. Days later, she returned to the Oak Creek Artisan Fair. The sun was out, the guitarist was playing, and the smell of cinnamon almonds was in the air. It was the same, but entirely different. No one stared, but as she walked past the stalls, people met her eyes. They nodded. A silent acknowledgement. A shared understanding. Tasha, the teenager with the phone, approached her shyly. "You actually did it," she whispered, her eyes wide with awe. Aris knelt slightly, meeting her gaze. "No," she said softly, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. "We did." That night, for the last time in room 212, Aris sat in front of her laptop and hit record. She looked directly into the camera, no script, no notes. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. What happened here in Oak Creek was never just about a torn dress. It was about a system that believes it can tear away a person's dignity and face no consequences. They thought that by humiliating me, they could silence me." She reached beside her and picked up the folded, torn piece of emerald green linen, placing it on the table. It looked small, insignificant. "They thought this was a symbol of my shame. But they were wrong. It has become a symbol of their exposure. This isn't just my story. It belongs to every person who has ever been told to be quiet, to accept injustice, to know their place." She leaned a little closer to the lens, her voice dropping to an intimate, powerful tone. "If this story meant something to you, if it made you angry, if it made you feel seen, don't let that feeling fade. Share it. Talk about it. Demand accountability in your own communities. Stand up for the next person so they don't have to stand alone." Thank you for watching. Follow this channel to see what we do next. And in the comments, please, share your thoughts, but always comment with respect. Because the only way we build a better world is together. She ended the recording. The small red light blinked off, but across the country, a million other lights were just beginning to turn on.